Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. As we always do, we're breaking down the basics of all political issues so that you get to decide. On the show with me today, the smartest young up-and-coming conservative commentator, speaker, author of Last Chance to Save Our Republic, founder of Culture of 1776 with the mission of igniting the next generation to be bold in a world that has rejected common sense, and host of The Hannah Faulkner Show. As a former national motocross and stock car racer, she's now dedicating her time to travel the country, speaking about issues surrounding us, doing undercover work to expose corruption and empower others to stand for the truth. It's the Hannah Faulkner. Hannah, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to meet you at AmFest, and I'm excited to dig into all these things today. I appreciate you.
Thank you. So glad you're here. Listen, you are so young. You speak with such great wisdom on a real host of current political events, which I love. Tell my audience how you came to be really the next big thing in politics.
Yeah, well, I give all credit to my parents. I've grown up in a wonderful home, great, strong family unit. And actually, in my book, Last Chance to Save Our Republic, I highlight the greatest issue I believe facing our country. And that's the breakdown of the family. I mean, strong families make strong countries. And that's why these communists are constantly attacking the family unit, because once you break down the family, I mean, you can get really all of society. And so I've grown up in a strong family where we've always talked about these issues. My parents have taught us the why behind the what. I think that's why so often so many kids go off to college and completely lose their entire moral compass. And it's because they really just didn't know the why behind what they believe in. And so since I can remember, we would watch the news, we'd watch documentaries, we'd always engage in political and spiritual topics. And I remember being around 12 or 13 years old, and I wanted to do something about what was happening in our country. I wanted to do something about what I was seeing in the news. I didn't really know how to articulate it, but I wanted to at least be a part of some change. And so, actually, shortly after I had that feeling, I went to my homeschool tutorial that I attended at that time. And I showed up, and a lady from Turning Point USA was there to share about Turning Point, their mission on high school campuses, college campuses, and how we could get involved. So I was like, man, I want to be involved in this. Like, I've been praying and hoping that something like this would come along. And so I joined Turning Point. I started a Turning Point chapter when I was 13, and we hosted some events here in Rutherford County, Tennessee. We had like a socialism versus capitalism debate and some other fun events, but it wasn't anything really big until August of 2022. My 7-year-old sister at the time was paralyzed in a freak swimming accident that paralyzed her from the chest down. And so, because of her accident, we were in several different medical facilities from Kentucky to Tennessee and even in Atlanta, Georgia. And around this time, in August of 2022, that fall of 2022, we started to see these activists and politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz expose these medical facilities and these doctors for performing these genital mutilation surgeries on children and prescribing these hormones and sterilization of all of it really just kind of blow up, especially in Tennessee with Vanderbilt Hospital, which was one of the hospitals that we spent some time at. And we got to see it up close and personal with our own eyes on how they were imposing this state-sponsored religion, the LGBTQ religious cult, as I call it, the rainbow cult, onto the children. We'd see the rainbow flags everywhere. Doctors would come in with their pronoun pens and the rainbow on it. And one of the chaplains at the hospital was a transgender. And I remember being at the one in Kentucky, and I asked the front desk, I said, do you guys perform these surgeries and hormones to children? And they said, absolutely. If you're interested, I can connect you with the office that does this. And so at the time I was 15, and I'm like, what in the world is happening? We start to see stories like Chloe Cole and Prisha, all of these detransitioners come out, say that the medical industry has lied to them. They have ruined their life, and they want to stand for children. And so I felt like I had to do something, because it wasn't necessarily affecting me physically, but it was affecting my generation. It was affecting my peers. And I knew that something had to happen to stop this ideology. And so I prayed, and I was like, Lord, like, what can I do about it? And so I felt called to do the first Teens Against Gender Mutilation rally. And I did that in January of 2023 with Turning Point USA. We had like 600 attendees, 200 protesters come out. It was an incredible event. But it was really just kind of like the beginning of my involvement in the political movement, of really being able to be boots on the ground, these grassroots efforts to stop this madness from happening. And then I ended up joining the Reawaken America tour with General Flynn. He invited me to the rest of them until it concluded actually this year in October. Selma, North Carolina. So then I just started traveling, and I started my podcast and wrote the book last year, and we just published it January 1st. So it's been a crazy, wild ride. I actually just recently did a BBC documentary with them out of Great Britain, and there was lots of crazy articles that came out of that. But at the end of the day, I do what I do because we have to educate this generation. I mean, education is the best defense against tyranny, and Gen Z is. I believe. I think we have to be realistic. Like while they're waking up, there's still so much indoctrination happening across the country. And if we do not step up and do something, especially with this upcoming administration, we're going to lose this republic. And that's why I said, this might just be the last chance to save our republic.
Mm. You were really boots on the ground there in Tennessee then, because that's the case that's in front of the Supreme Court right now,
Yep.
having to do with really the decision over whether or not it is constitutional to provide puberty blocker medication to minors. And that's going to be really interesting to track. You're so well spoken. You're so mature. You're so smart. Can I ask you if you were homeschooled or did you go through the traditional school system?
Yeah, so I actually went to public school in kindergarten. That was the only time that I spent in public school. And the reason is, so in Tennessee, this is a conservative state, but I actually think we're a little bit more liberal than a lot of people think we are, unfortunately, especially on the local level. We actually are fighting a lot of pornographic content in books. I get calls from people that moved here from California thinking it was going to be better, and they say it's actually worse because these people call themselves conservatives and then vote to protect this explicit content. So when I was in kindergarten, two of my teachers, my gem teacher and my art teacher, which were actually my favorite teachers, were both a part of the LGBTQ movement. And it wasn't like something that was private to them. They would share it with the classroom. And then one specific moment I remember, this was Barack Obama's second term. And he was running, and they asked the students who we would vote for if we could vote. And they encouraged all of us to put our vote in for Barack Obama if we could vote. And I was like, wait a second. Like, I thought, this wasn't your job. Like, if you were advocating for a conservative president, like, you would get fired, and they would tell you that you're infringing upon the students' freedom of speech. And that isn't your place to say that. And so I went home and told my parents. And there was just so many different things that happened while I was in public school that my parents decided to homeschool me. So I was homeschooled from first grade until the graduation of high school. And then I did online with Liberty University. But yes, I was homeschooled. I think it's the best decision any parent can do, especially with all of this indoctrination in public schools and even in private schools. I think a lot of people think and assume that private schools are a lot better, but oftentimes they're just as bad as public schools.
You're like a walking, talking billboard for homeschooling. So I hope people are paying very close attention to what you're saying. And there's so many things I want to ask you about because I think that your take is really important to focus on here. Now, did you turn 18? Were you able to vote in this presidential election, or did you miss it this time?
No, I don't turn 18 till June 7th, actually,
Oh,
of
wow.
2020.
Okay.
I have like 5 more months. So I
You're
was
so
not able to
young.
vote, but I was encouraging everyone. I was on these college campuses I actually brought, right before the election, the week before the election, I brought about 15 middle school and high schoolers that couldn't vote out to a college campus. And they were encouraging all these college students to vote and to vote with their convictions. And it was really cool to see like all these students that can't vote, but they're so passionate about protecting the next generations that they're willing to do anything. So I couldn't vote this election, but hopefully next one I'll be voting.
Oh, I know that you will be. And it's such a great example of what you can do until you do turn 18. There's so many ways to advocate, to share messaging, to get these important pieces of information out to people and encourage others to exercise that civic duty. So I love hearing that you were so effective before you even could legally cast any ballot. So that is incredible. This generation, your generation, Gen Z, a lot of people have talked about how critical you have been in this last presidential election, but you're actually going to be the largest voting bloc once again in the 2028 presidential election. So you're going to get your chance there. And I have no doubt you're going to be bringing a literal troop of people along with you. But I also think that we've got to stay focused on Gen Z and do even a better job going forward of understanding a lot of the issues in front of you, what life is like for you, some of the concerns, and really just focus not now that 2024 is done, but going forward to make sure that we're not just using you guys for the youth vote and then moving on. And
Yeah.
it seemed like the Trump campaign did a pretty darn good job. A lot of people put that at Barron Trump's feet, that he encouraged his dad to get on all of these podcasts and really listen and reach out and connect with younger voters. But the other side did a pretty terrible job, actually, of connecting with the youth vote. So I would love to just hear from you a little bit about your generation, especially post 24 election. Do you guys feel like there is still that level of interest in what your life experience is and how things will be for you and your cohort over the next 4 years?
Yeah, no, I think Gen Z is really excited. And obviously, we saw them wake up. I think it was by like 11 points come out for President Trump more than Joe Biden in 2020. And that's because, I mean, they can't afford groceries. They can't afford to buy a home to live out the American dream as our founding fathers intended us to be able to live out. And that's why they saw what happened in 2020. They saw that they couldn't attend their graduations, that because of these tyrannical dictators, they couldn't, attend weddings and go to church. And while churches were being shut down, strip clubs and liquor stores were remaining open, and lots of questions just needed to be asked by Gen Z, and they started asking those questions. And then you see what happened with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and how they were quickly exiting out Joe Biden and entering in Kamala Harris with this claim that Joe Biden is no longer competent to be president, but he was competent for the last 3.5 years. So many questions I think Gen Z was asking and curious about, because I mean, we've been lied to, we've been manipulated, and I believe that they are fed up. But talking about the Trump administration, I think that the Trump campaign, they have done a phenomenal job getting on all of those podcasts with the Aiden Rosses of our generation, so many streamers and UFC fighters attending these UFC fights, really connecting with the young people and getting on their level is so important, especially to protect our republic, because these are the future generations. I mean, Ronald Reagan said that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And so if we aren't educating them and we aren't involving them, unfortunately, Donald Trump's generation is going to pass away. My parents' generation is going to pass away, and we're the next generations. And so if they aren't educated on their history, if they do not understand what is happening around us, this republic is going to dissolve. But talking about how many people have done, or who has done a good job or a poor job of kind of incorporating Gen Z going past the 2024 election, I will say I've noticed that mainstream media outlets have kind of stopped hosting Gen Zers on their
Mm.
platforms. And I think it was kind of a media stunt for them to include Gen Zers on their platforms. So my hope is that especially networks like Fox News and even CNN and MSNBC will incorporate more Gen Z and youth voters post 2024 election, because I just noticed, over the past few months that they haven't been showcasing Gen Z and hearing from them as we're headed into the January 20th inauguration and President Trump's presidency and what's going forward. So I do hope to see more from the media specifically. I know independent networks like yourself, which is incredible. You guys are a free speech platform. You guys are showcasing Gen Z. You're talking to Gen Z, but I don't see that a lot from mainstream media outlets. So that's something I'm really hoping to see from, especially for the next 4 years.
Yeah, same. I'll join you in that. I think the mainstream media is having a little reshuffling going on right now, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to survive, number one. But I'm guessing in about 2.5, 3 years, they're going to circle back and realize, oh, hey, we might need to help motivate those people's votes again. But I think it's so important that we hear from you guys and pay attention to what you're experiencing and what you think right now. You mentioned Biden's competency. What a roller coaster that has been over the last few years. He has been on a tear at the end of his single term presidency. He's really going out with fireworks and flair, and it seems like just kind of maybe doing whatever the heck he feels like doing. With the pardons, giving particular people medals of honor, deciding to let pieces of border wall be sold off. It seems like about every week there is another massive chunk of funding going over to Ukraine. What do you think about Biden's final days in office and some of the actions he's been participating in?
Yeah, no, it's been a complete disgrace. I mean, I really believe that this administration, this regime has committed treason against the American people by allowing this wide open borders. record high criminals coming over. We have Tren de Aragua in almost every major city in America. Here in the state of Tennessee, Nashville, Memphis, we've got Tren de Aragua groups, which, I mean, like MS-13 gang members on steroids. So this is, I mean, this is a 100% national security threat. They have put Americans' lives at risk. If you look at all of these Democrat-run cities, crime is on the rise, homelessness, drug addiction. I mean, you go to New York City, everybody talks about how beautiful it is. Unfortunately, you look at this, you go down to these streets, I mean, it is filth. Like, it smells horrible. You see needles everywhere, homelessness, veterans on the street. They have protected and have given more money to Ukraine and to illegals over our veterans. So, I mean, the list is so endless. We could talk about it for hours of everything that this regime has done. What they've done to President Trump, you look at this hush money, this witch hunt sham case. From the top to the bottom, this is all being led by communist Democrats. I mean, from Joe Biden to Alvin Bragg to this judge that his daughter has been able to raise $93 million for the Biden campaign. So, I mean, everything they've done is a disgrace against the American people. I really do believe that they should be criminally liable. You look at 2020. You look at what they did through Facebook. We're seeing Mark Zuckerberg now come out saying that he was extremely pressured by this regime to censor Americans and censor people that criticize the vaccine. They should be criminally held liable for what they've done, and I think it's disgraceful. But I'm excited. We've got 10 days till Biden is out and Donald Trump is in. So I'm excited. We definitely have lots to look forward to, but also lots of accountability that needs to be held.
Do you think that he will be held accountable for any of it? It seems as though we have spent 4 years watching the actions of Biden and his administrative heads just, be released to do whatever they want, no consequence, no accountability. Do you think that Trump is going to hold them accountable, or under, newly confirmed Supreme Court presidential immunity decision, just sort of say, well, that's in the past and we're moving forward, and he'll try to right some of the wrongs, but maybe not have Biden and his admin heads kind of go through the legal process? What do you think is going to happen there?
I really hope that President Trump, I do believe he will hold a lot of them accountable for their actions. Even you look at Kash Patel, he's got a lot of work to do with the FBI. I think a lot of these new cabinet picks will definitely work on holding these tyrannical dictators accountable for what they've done. But I will say, the media has painted Trump as a very mean man, but he's actually very nice. He is very forgiving. Considering the things that they have done to President Trump, he's a very forgiving man. I mean, you look at the things that he said about Hillary Clinton. He never really did anything to her. I mean, there was some media stuff that he said about her, but in the end, he never did. I mean, he's such a forgiving man. I actually wish he was a little bit more harsh, and he held these people more accountable for their actions, especially from what they've done to him. So I hope that he will keep his word. I do believe he will keep his word, especially when it comes to the things that they've done for the last 4 years. But I will say, I have to give him credit. He is a very forgiving person, more forgiving than I probably would be if I was in his position. But I definitely think we're going to see some accountability for people like Christopher Wray, Dr. Fauci, for what they've done. Alongside the Biden-Harris regime. Now, as it pertains to Joe Biden himself, I'm not sure how much we can do to him. He's completely incompetent as an individual. I think a lot of the decisions that we have seen haven't exactly been from Joe Biden. But even when he was competent, he was not a good leader at all. He was never a good politician. He was one of the most corrupt, crooked politicians. He always said the most stupid statements on air. So I don't think there isn't really much that they can do to him, considering he is literally has dementia. He can't remember where he's going. He has no idea how to read or speak without a teleprompter. So I'm not sure what exactly is going to happen to him himself, but to the other people involved, I think there's going to be a lot of accountability.
We're a forgiving nation, too. We're quick to forgive and forget. So I'm curious as to what you and your younger generation will think of Biden going forward. What will his legacy be? Will he be remembered fondly, or maybe not so much?
Yeah, no, I think he needs to be remembered as the worst president in American history, in world history, frankly. What he's done, again, to the American people, their regime as a whole. And now, whether it's Barack Obama or Joe Biden, he's the one that's been spearheading, Barack Obama, I believe, has probably been making a ton of decisions. But as a whole, I mean, Joe Biden is leading this country, quote unquote. I'll say that very lightly. He's the commander in chief. So I will say that my hope and prayer is that Gen Z and the youth will recognize him as the worst president in American history for what he's done to us.
Yeah, there was data that just came out, I want to say within the last 24 hours, that showed that his approval is the lowest. I mean, absolute bottom, lowest of any president that we've ever had. So that's going to be a tough wall to scale for him to get up and over that. Um, you mentioned our immigration crisis that is still raging. It has not um, had resolution yet. Many people are hopeful that it will. Again, what's Gen Z thinking on this? How is immigration viewed? Because immigration of 10 years ago, say, was a different conversation. There were different statistics, a different type of immigrant was crossing mostly the southern border. And so we kind of have these two groups now of immigrants illegally residing in the United States. What do you guys think about what has happened over the past few years?
Yeah, well, I mean, once you think about it in terms of national security, and you start asking, when families are fleeing war, when individuals are fleeing war, they bring their wives and their children. But when men are headed to a war zone to start a war, they come alone. And so what we've seen almost every single day is thousands upon thousands of fighting age men coming across our border alone. They have no families with them, and I'm not saying that there aren't families coming across their border at the border. They are, and we've lost 350,000, over 350,000. Migrant children, unaccompanied. We have no idea where they are. But by and large, this is a national security threat. And we are seeing the results of this right now. We've seen it in Colorado. We've seen it across all of these major cities with all of these gang members going into homes. And we saw with Lake and Riley. We saw it with so many innocent individuals that were murdered, brutally murdered, raped by these illegal criminals. And this is what happens when you are not tough on crime and when you allow a wide open border. And the Democratic Party and even some conservatives, some Republicans will come in, well, we need to be compassionate, we need to be loving. Of course, I'm all about immigration. I know so many people that have immigrated here from other countries that have been able to live out the American dream. That's what makes America beautiful, is we're kind of like the melting pot, but you have to come to the United States of America legally. And I think this has been a very strategic ploy by this regime. And you talk about them being a disgrace to this country. I believe that this is just one little piece in the basket. And my thing, the Democrats always talk about women's rights. They talk about protecting women. The biggest thing that I have a problem with at the border, obviously, is our national security and what these criminals are doing to Americans. But also the fact that they have said nothing about the over 350,000 unaccompanied minors that have been raped, kidnapped, murdered. We don't know where they're at. What about the women, the underwear, the ladies' underwear that we found at the border? The women that have been trafficked, that have been raped by these gang members. Kamala Harris, during her campaign, said absolutely nothing. She is the border czar, and she has refused to discuss this crisis at our border. She has refused to talk about the women and children that have been kidnapped and raped. And that is one of the biggest disgraces against the American people, especially if you want to talk about caring about women. They don't care about women. And I'll say this, I've said this before, and I'll say it again, the Democratic Party, they honestly hate women. They vote directly against us in almost every bill you saw right before the election, where the Democrats, every single Democrat voted to protect criminal aliens that rape or murder women over the women themselves. They voted to protect those criminals over the women themselves. And that's not the first time that we've seen this happen. So, I think immigration from Gen Z's perspective, we've got to recognize it. Yes, we have to be compassionate and loving. And I know with these mass deportations, we're probably going to be seeing a lot of emotional pulls that families are being separated. We've got to get to the bottom of it. We've got to look at these stories of what's happening at the New York City subway. That woman that was burned alive by an illegal, Laken Riley being brutally murdered. She fought for over 17 minutes for her life. We've got to remember those stories. When these mass deportations start rolling out, we start deporting these criminals and these illegals, we've got to remember the fact of what they've been doing for the last 4 years with these open borders.
Yeah, I think we've done a good job recently of keeping stories like Laken Riley's brutal assault and murder at the forefront of these conversations. The Laken Riley Act just passed, and a lot of people responding to that and saying, hey, this should be the law regardless. So I think in a legal and legislative way, we're sort of having to reconfirm a lot of law that is already the law. It already exists, but we have had a lot of issue with, um, particularly within the Biden administration, the law not being enacted or followed. And the result is that it is harming American citizens. So, on that thread, I want to talk to you about this sort of new state of feminism. It seems very confused. To your point, we just had a woman run for president, offering the expectation that people should vote for her because she's a woman and she would be the first female president in this country, and that would be the merit on which she could plant, and that would be enough. And yet, again, just to what you said, we're seeing this sort of dismissive, completely unconnected, unempathetic reasoning having to do with what's happening at the southern border. I mean, the number of children missing in the United States today has exploded. And the real sad truth is we don't know the number. I talk about this a lot because in my personal life, I do a lot of anti-child sex trafficking work. It's something I'm passionate about fighting, as I know many, many people are and have come to understand better recently. I think a lot of great patriots are doing phenomenal work. Like James O'Keefe was down at the border, getting undercover video and trying to help people understand how bad it really is. We are a compassionate nation. We also don't really always want to hear about these things because they're awful and it will just break your heart right in two. But where do you think things stand in talking about feminism and being feminist today? We've got these Title IX attacks. We've got men saying they're women participating in women's sports and taking opportunities from biological girls and women. We've just had an issue at the Capitol. Nancy Mace spoke out pretty powerfully against a legislator who is transgender, our first transgender legislator, saying that he would like to use the women's restroom. We're in a real tangle here. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it's important. Like in my book, I break down the feminist movement from the very beginning. I mean, where this even began, where it started. I think it's important for us to, in order to solve these problems, we kind of have to get to the root of the problem. And so for me, you look at the feminist movement. I mean, the feminist movement didn't exactly start in the United States of America. It really began in Eastern Europe. Ideas across Eastern Europe of feminism and kind of starting to pit men and women against one another, proving this idea that there's no difference between men and women. It's kind of just a social construct. And then you look at the women's suffrage movement in the early 1900s. And I think a lot of times we forget to separate the women's suffrage movement from the feminist movement, the sexual revolution, as I call it, which really started in the 50s, 60s, and then onward. Because with the women's suffrage movement, of course, there were a few bad apples, but by and large, these women just wanted to be able to vote and participate in the elections with men. And while some people, disagree with that, at the end of the day, this was a different movement, and we have to separate the two. So then you move on to the feminist movement, the sexual revolution. There's like the first wave, and a lot of people associate the first wave again in the United States of America. But I truly believe the first wave was in Eastern Europe, and the second wave kind of began in the 50s and 60s with this idea that women are being oppressed by the patriarch. Betty Friedman wrote the book, The Feminine Mystique, which I talk about in my book. And in her book, she greatly criticized the traditional family and said that women are being oppressed by the patriarch. And ultimately, the idea from these women was that women should be able to have sex whenever they want, wherever they want, and they should be equal to men in that order. But the assumption in that is that men are also doing that, having sex anytime, wherever they want. And that was something that was normalized for men and should be normalized for women. But in reality, of course, there's some men out there that are doing that and living that lifestyle, but that was not seen as normal. That was actually wrong, and that was seen as toxic masculinity. If you want to talk about toxic masculinity, that was seen as not normal for men and women. And so they kind of pushed this notion that this was normal for men, so it should be normal for women. And then we move into the 70s and 80s where they start pushing this notion that there's no difference between male and female. It's just a social construct. If you feel like a man today, then you can, be a man. You can do all of these things that men can do. And then you get now in 2025 where we have men in our spaces and we're wondering how in the world we got to the point where men are identifying as women and we walk into the restroom and there's a man. posing as a woman, or we're participating in our sports and opportunities and scholarships are being stripped. We wonder how in the world we got here. And I really believe that feminism, in order for transgenderism to happen, feminism is almost the preliminary phase to transgenderism. Because the idea is, again, is that there's no difference between men and women. It's just a social construct. So if there's no difference between men and women, it's just a social construct, then why does it matter that men are in our spaces today? So anytime a woman says, I'm a feminist, but I'm against men in our spaces, it's kind of like an oxymoron of oxymorons, because the feminist movement is the movement that pushed for the notion that there's no difference between men and women. And so until we wake up to that, until we recognize that the feminist movement is the result, is the problem, is the root of the problem that we're seeing today, I don't think we're going to be able to really solve this issue, because so often we see all these feminists come out saying, I'm against men in our spaces, but it's like, you cannot call yourself a feminist and also be against men in our spaces, because the feminist movement as a whole is almost it's a very it's a movement that's foundational to Marxism. I mean, Karl Marx talks about it all the time in the Communist Manifesto. He talked about it in many of his writings, that movements like feminism that pit men and women against one another, making them the enemy of each other, is a foundational principle, a foundational movement to a Marxist society. And not only that, not only has the feminism made men and women both the most oppressed, the most anxiety ridden, the most confused generation of male and female. But also, this has destroyed the family unit, because when you pit men and women against one another, your result is confused men and women, which in return becomes a broken family unit. And so that's why I really, in the last chapter, or I guess it's the chapter before last, in my book, I really talk about the feminist movement, how we have gotten to the point where we have men in our spaces today, and how the family unit has been very strategically broken down. And I will say this, because I mentioned communism a lot, and I do believe that that word communism is thrown around a lot of times, but nobody is really digesting or understanding the implications of what we're seeing this communist takeover in our country. And actually, in 1963, a woman named Miss Patricia Nordman, she was warning Congress in 1963. The record, you can look it up if your audience would like to, but she was warning our congressional members about the current communist goals. There's about 45 of them, and she was listing them off, and one of them actually included the fact that one of their main goals is to dismantle the family unit, to embrace promiscuity, to embrace divorce, to make divorce easy, to embrace homosexuality, and to create a society that doesn't understand morality. So to break down moral standards. And I believe that's exactly what they've successfully done. So again, I go back to my point, I stand on it. Feminism is a foundational movement to Marxism and ultimately to communism. And it's something that we should all be very aware of, educate ourselves on the history of this to understand the things that we're fighting today.
Sounds like your book is a really good place to start on a lot of those topics. And I'm so glad that you are writing about them and breaking them down. Confusion is a real thread through all of this. And may I just offer that we don't need any extra help having difficulty pairing men and women together. It's not the easiest thing to start with. And especially in today's culture, the way the economy is and just how we are societally, families need help coming together. We don't need anything else attacking this very fragile path forward to finding a partner, committing, being in a monogamous marriage relationship, having kids, staying together, being able to pay your bills, have a home, keep a job. That is hard enough already. We don't need any outside influences attacking it or putting thoughts in everyone's head that, hey, you can just run around and be completely non-committal and do whatever you want. So I remain hopeful that things will start to shift back towards supporting a more traditional way of doing that, because it's certainly best for us as a society in a totality. The other comment I wanted to offer, and I just think that your points are so excellent that you're making here, is talking about communism or Marxism and people not having a full, complete understanding, not just of what those forms of government are, but how they play out, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes they sound really good in theory, but also, do you think that we are just a culture that if things aren't going perfectly right within our constitutional republic, that we're just going to chuck it for something else? I mean, it's always going to be hard. We're people, there's sin in the world.
Yep.
It's going to get off the tracks somehow, but do we just chuck it and say, let's try socialism, let's try Marxism? That sounds really good. It sounds really fair and compassionate.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is a part of the communist goals, a part of the list that she actually warned about the current communist goals was one of them was to basically make the American Constitution seem outdated, old fashioned, and it doesn't relate to the times that we're living in. And what do you see from a lot of these, Democrats, these leftists, these professors? They're constantly making this pull that the Constitution doesn't apply to us today. It's kind of old fashioned, it's kind of outdated. So that is actually a very strategic goal of communism is to make the American Constitution look like it is outdated and doesn't fit our current times. So when people say that to me, when people say, "Oh, it's just old fashioned," I'm like, "Do you actually know that a part of the communist goal is to make people seem and to believe that this is old fashioned and outdated and it doesn't fit our current times that we're living in?" And something interesting, a part of the communist goals is that a part of one of the goals, I think it's actually number 24, is that they want to embrace promiscuity, embrace pornography, promote it in all TV, movies, music, all of that. And then anyone who wants to censor it, tell them, explain to them that they are trying to censor
Mm.
freedom of speech. And so you see, I think in 13 states right now, Pornhub has been removed because they have violated age verification laws or allowed children onto their site, and so the state went after them and imposed harsher laws onto them, which is rightfully so. And so the like for instance in Louisiana, when the age verification law came out for Pornhub in Louisiana, their site, the trafficking for their site dropped about 80%. And so the response to this was to say that the state and legislators were trying to ban Pornhub for free expression and their freedom of speech and were infringing upon their First Amendment, which is actually, again, another very Marxist communist idea to try to convince people that you're banning freedom of speech when in reality you're actually just trying to protect the minds of
Mhm.
children and protect children's innocence. So and anytime a school board member tries to protect pornographic books, I read this out to them. I'm like, do you realize the ramifications of the argument you are trying to make to protect explicit content? So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it's so important that we start really understanding um, communism, but also the history of communism, especially in things like Mao's Cultural Revolution, understanding what Mao did, understanding what happened under the Soviet Union with Lenin and Stalin, and seeing the way that they tried to take over their people. And even in my book, like you talk about the Second Amendment, you talk about all this gun control. I really don't believe these people care about safety. You look at what happened when they tried to kill Donald Trump. There were no ploys for gun control, no ploys for safety. You look at the United Healthcare CEO when he was assassinated. There were no ploys for gun control. Actually, they said they were joyed. Taylor Lorenz said that she was overjoyed about this assassination and that it was deserving. So these people don't care about. They do not care about safety. They are an anti-self-defense movement,
Mm.
which again happens in communist countries where you disarm the people, whether that be guns, then it turns into knives, like we're seeing in England right now. So at the end of the day, we've got to understand our history. We've got to understand what happened before us in order to take back our country and to fight back against these issues. But I agree with you. We've got to really break down these terms and these ideas and where it even began in the first place.
Absolutely. Now, you're such a great example of jumping in at such a young age and getting involved in politics. You did that through Turning Point USA. And if people are interested, and especially if you are a 13-year-old, just like Hannah, who wanted to do something about what you were hearing and seeing and wanted to get involved, people can certainly go check that out. And I encourage people really to read your book, Last Chance to Save Our Republic. Check out Culture of 1776. Tell us a little bit about, well, I've got you for a few more minutes, about what Culture of 1776 is.
Yeah, so Culture 1776, I started that earlier in 2024, really just to create conversation starters for my generation. I mean, anyone can wear the pieces. We've got feminine, not feminist. My pronouns are USA. Just classic USA crew necks. We've got Make America Classy again, which really took off in the summer of 2024. So this past summer. So many different just sayings on these shirts. And at the end of the day, or there's one that says "Choose life your mom did." But really just these statements that really allow young people to get into conversations with people. So they wear the shirt to school, and then a student says, why are you feminine, not feminist? What does it mean to be,
Mhm.
embracing femininity and not feminism? Or what does it mean to choose life your mom did? Like, why are you pro-life? So really, I think that's the point of it, is because if we really want to take back this country, especially with young people, is young people have to be willing to engage in these hard conversations. I think for so long we're afraid that we're going to lose friends. We're afraid we're going to be called names, or this or that, or we're going to get mean comments back to us. But at the end of the day, like, standing on principle is all that matters. Standing on what we believe in and not backing down. And also, when you are educated on these issues, I think you're going to be way more opted. You're going to be way more encouraged to engage in these hard conversations. And you hear a lot of times young people and even older people, people 80s, 90s, like I've heard this from them too, that they don't care about politics and they're not interested in it. And I think it comes from more so of an ignorant standpoint. I think it comes from just being more so ignorant on the issues, because if we do understand, people that do understand what's happening around us and they are educated on these topics, they're not going to say they don't like politics. They're not going to say that they're not interested in talking about the murder of over 75 million innocent babies when you see the pictures. So I really think that statement comes from more so of a lack of awareness on these topics. I don't think it comes from they just genuinely don't care about politics. I think it's just the way that the media has spread it politics about, and the ignorance and maybe just uneducation about these topics. So Culture 1776 really was just created to create these conversation pieces for young people, middle schoolers, high schoolers, to just engage in these hard conversations with our peers.
Yeah, everything's political, right? And I have to give a really big shout out to your parents, Hannah, for bringing you up and asking you questions, allowing you to, what it sounds like, allowing you to form your own thoughts and opinions on issues that are political. I wish more people would do it. It's exactly why I started Politically Basic, was just so that we can dig in. And the more we learn, the more we understand and are able to have open dialogue about every single issue under the sun that is political, especially now, the more we benefit from that individually and collectively as a society. So I love that Culture of 1776 seems to be like a physical expression of, in a lot of ways, the way that you were brought up and given those opportunities. So I hope people check it out. And I have so many more questions for you, and I hope that you will be able to join me again on Let's Do Another episode of Politically Basic, because you're so bright, you're so well informed. I love hearing your perspective, and I think it's a really important one for my audience to hear. So I hope that you'll come back and be with us again on the show.
No, I'd love to. I really appreciate what you're doing, diving into these topics, getting into the real issues that we're fighting. No watering it down, just saying it how it is. It's so important. So I appreciate you, Kyle.
Yeah, we're just doing the basics today, girl. You're going to come back and we're going to pick one of the many topics you are so well versed on, and we're going to dig in for sure. So thank you again. Thanks for being on the show today.
Absolutely.
And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Politically Basic. We're committed to breaking down the basics so you get to decide. Be sure to check us out at politicallybasic.com and follow us at Politically Basic on all socials so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.